The intersectionality is commonly defined as an intersection of multiple oppressions, typically caused by identities such as race, class, sex, gender, etc., resulting in the creation of overlapping and interdependent forms of oppression. Intersectionalists call that no form of oppression be thought of and treated separately. An example of this is with abortion laws and how they don't exclusively affect women negatively, but disproportionately harm women of color and working class communities. While there's nothing fundamentally wrong with this explanation, that's all it is. Rarely there's a coherent solution that intersectionalists offer. Additionally, Marxists have long recognized this fragile oppressions can overlap and intersect. Engels recognized the intersection of class and gender in the origin of the family, the private property, and the state, as did Marx, Lenin, Kollontai, Hampton, etc. The only difference, however, is that this pattern wasn't called intersectionality back then. People weren't to be called intersectional. Rather, it was called solidarity. There are many issues amongst the supporters and theoreticians of intersectionality, the main issue being that identities such as race, sex, and gender are seen as abstract, isolated floating bodies. There's very little material analysis within intersectional analysis. The basic idea of overlapping oppressions being distinct is just true. The problem with it and other identity politics is not it's because there's a tension between identity versus class. The problem is that from a Marxist perspective, oppression is meant to be a class issue, a material issue. Racism started to justify slavery, gender oppression to control reproduction, and they are maintained and perpetuated and even made worse by capitalists to maintain capitalism. To say that it's a class issue is the best way to fight oppression of all forms with revolutionary class politics, which of course requires solidarity and recognition of oppression. Poverty and class-based oppression is a major issue in many of these marginalized communities, yet this is rarely even get brought up in the intersectionalities, or is it just seen as a secondary subject? Additionally, many progressive circles, the working class, especially the rural working class, is dismissed as a monolith of reactionary views. This view is not only incredibly wrong, it is classist and bigoted, as it's marginalized people who suffer in poverty at high rates, especially if they live in rural areas. Speaking of, class is often the last issue to be brought up in these woke and intersectional circles, whereas individual identities such as sex, race, and gender are often raised into the pedestal, the highest position of such. They are seen as essential to one's identity regardless of the class position or their role to the means of production. A person becomes the amalgamation of their identity. What is more essential is an individualistic than that. The emergence of intersectionality as really a popular theory of current feminism saw different responses from Marxist feminists. Traditional Marxist feminists remained critical of its reliance on bourgeois identity politics, arguing that intersectionality limits conceptions of class and power by overemphasizing the individual and not the collective proletariat experience. In this view, differing identities are to be collectively overcome in order to challenge the capitalist structures. The intersectionalists fail to recognize that class society is the root of racism and sexism, or that people of color, women, and others make up a large portion of the working class. If they truly want to eradicate racism and sexism, they would have to focus their attention on the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, the bankers, the financiers, the landlords, the emperors, all those who contribute nothing while leeching off the hard work of the workers, often of said marginalized identities themselves that are largely ignored by the intersectionalists. In the end, however, this attempt at proper intersectionality that is to Marxist framework is unlikely bound to happen, for intersectionalists will always find ways to espouse liberal ideas of the Marxist class struggle that tends to integrate these oppressions into one singular socio-economic ill, that is capitalism, that is to be blamed for all, not a group of people of a certain race, gender, or religion. It's a class of all bourgeoisie that perpetuates it, and intersectionalists, failing to recognize this, will unfortunately fall into a much darker line and become a form of fascism disguised in progressive outfit.